to the tribe as an outcome of language and cultural engagement. We have already seen that knowledge of language and culture contributes to tribal connections and strengthens the entire tribal community in multiple ways in terms of education, well-being, work, play, and family life. Previous research in the fields of psychology and education suggests that when individuals are tied to their cultural selves and communities, their sense of who they are, their outlook on life, and the manner in which they live their very lives and choices that they make are all enhanced for the better. Through our work with the Myaamia students attending Miami University, we have seen the benefit of building a strong connection to the Miami community. Myaamia students report an individual emergence of cultural identity. We have observed firsthand the intergenerational transmission of cultural elements that strengthen youth and support a deepening sense of self, language competency, and commitment to tribe and community as the students matriculate through the Myaamia courses that they take here on campus. As we spoke with Myaamia students, they initially reported that they identified certainly as being Native American along with all the other aspects of their identity, as Daryl suggested earlier, just this integrated identity formation. They really talked a lot about all the different aspects of how they identify. But as they move through the Myaamia courses and engage with the knowledge system, Myaamia students began to identify more with being Myaamia. And this identification grew from their freshman year, their first year, to their senior year. In addition to cultural identity observations, we also noticed academic performance was enhanced as the students took the Myaamia coursework. From the 2003 to 2013 decade, approximately 84 Myaamia students entered the university, and at the end of that 10-year period, the students graduating and being retained was at a 77% graduation rate. Now compare that with the rate of about 44% for Miami tribal students who came to Miami before the Myaamia courses were offered, and that was basically in the 1990s. So to compare these stats with national norms, let's look at the U.S. Department of Education's data. The four-year graduation rate for Native Americans in general in this country attending public four-year colleges is 17.9%, and the five-year graduation rate is 32.5%. But in addition to seeing an impact on Miami tribal students who connect with language and culture, we also noted shifts within the larger tribal community in terms of involvement in tribal events and language use and the inclusion of tribal traditions. But I believe the best and most powerful evidence to really gauge the impact of Myaamia communities' work is to really look at, and it's best illustrated by the personal journey of one of its own youth. And I take great pleasure and a lot of pride personally and professionally to turn the podium over to Haley Strass for a first-hand example of what it really means to pick up the threads.
Anyway, Susan. As Susan said, the impact of reconnecting individuals in our community with the tribe can be really powerful. One thing she didn't share was that this year's theme is highly connected with this, and it's reconnecting the Myaamia people to their indigenous knowledge system. In Myaamia, that's Myaamia, alinda imbapa kinamangwe, kinepuayo nemenane, kate mujake mamawe ayilepi yangwe. And this is translated to mean, we pick up some of the threads of our knowledge so that we will always remain together. So as I reflected personally upon this statement, it became clear to me that this image of a web or interconnectedness is truly an appropriate metaphor. So we're all interconnected as people by our own threads. One example of a type of thread that we make as Myaamia people is cordage, and a lot of times that can be made from asapa or dogbane. That's the only type that I've personally used to make cordage, so it really helps me to think of it that way. We use this often for many different things, so pikita hamenge, we make our lacrosse sticks with this. We use it with rope for building wikiame, for nets, for decoration. I've seen many of our tribal youth making bracelets out of this cordage. So each person in our community constitutes a single thread that can be helped to create this web within our community. And each time we engage in this idea of living properly or living how we know how best, we're splicing that thread. And what this means is you take another piece of asapa and you twist it into that prior thread to make it a longer and stronger piece of cordage. So the cordage gets longer and stronger the more that we splice it, the more we engage in living properly. And our individual cordage adds to this larger network as a community, this web. However, we're also making this larger product of a web, and each of these different pieces of cordage depend on one another. This is what allows our nets to become quite strong and adaptable, to be flexible. The more we engage in living properly together as a community, the bigger and stronger our net becomes. So each strand depends on one another. We're reliant upon one another to create this strong and flexible and adaptable net so that we can together connect and catch even the biggest of kikonesa, right, the biggest fish. So reflecting on my own experiences as a Myaamia youth, I identified that the first time that I spliced my own piece of cordage was in 4th grade, and it's not exactly a happy story. However, first I want to talk about a theory of identity formation. So psychological theory suggests that we as Native people have several stages in our life that we go through when we're developing our racial identity. So the first stage is called pre-encounter, where you're typically aware of this heritage that you have, but you're not quite sure what that means. And then the next stage is called encounter, where you have to have some sort of event that stimulates your understanding what it means to be a racial minority. It doesn't exactly fit for white individuals. So this event that stimulates this understanding or exploration can be a negative event like racism or discrimination. However, it could also be a positive event like powwows or like going to annual meeting for the first time. So for me, this happened when I was in 4th grade, learning about the Myaamia people in my Indiana social studies class, and we were learning Indiana history. We were preparing to go to the Chief LaFontaine's house at the Forks of the Wabash. And so I got really excited. I was like, I remember a lot about this. I know about this. My grandma told me about this. And so I shared with my teacher that this was my great-great-great-great-grandfather. And at that point, my teacher said, "Don't say that, Haley. You'll just confuse all the other students." So I will say that I didn't learn a lot more that day about being Myaamia. I was really confused, why would somebody tell me this? I was being taught one thing at home, people were telling me this one thing at home, and a different thing at school. And so I didn't understand, I was confused. However, it did cause me to question who I am and explore who I am as a person. So I didn't really tell anybody about this until winter break this year. But at this time in 4th grade, that was when I knew that I would only be satisfied, my curiosity would only be satisfied if I proved that teacher wrong. I tended to be a little stubborn that way. At that point, I began asking my father and my grandmother a lot about what it means to be Myaamia. And it was in that very next year, in 5th grade, when I went to Ewan Zapata for the first time. So that's a little embarrassing right there, but that year was an overnight camp. And I was really excited to go, and I was able to go with some of my cousins, which made me feel really comfortable. But it was also another turning point in my life where I was able to splice my asapa once again. This was the point where I knew that I was a Myaamia person and that my 4th grade teacher was wrong. And from that point on, I've been involved with the Myaamia community, returning to Ewan Zapata for several years after this. I returned in high school, at the end of high school as a counselor, throughout college, and now I've returned as a researcher. In addition, I went to Miami University, and that's where my identity formation really became an exponential growth. I've really started to learn what it means to be Myaamia, how to engage in this on a daily basis, and not just every year at Ewan Zapata. If it weren't for this experience, for the support from Ewan Zapata, from the university, from the Miami tribe, I don't know that I'd be up here today. So I've been able to splice my asapa in 4th grade and continue to do so every day since then. So as we strengthen our web, we also strengthen our cultural identity, our tie to one another. I want to emphasize this importance of identity. not just because that's what I research, but because it's what makes us who we are. So identity is an important part of everyone's life that's linked with many outcomes that Susan's already shared. And even though I have this idea in my mind and I research this on a daily basis, like what does it mean? What does identity mean? I went to the place that I know to go to for a quick answer, Wikipedia. So Wikipedia told me that identity is the conception, qualities, beliefs, and expressions that make a person, or their self-identity, or a group, such as a national or cultural identity, different from others. According to this understanding, it's thought that identity formation starts in adolescence, and this is a task that you have to complete before you're able to go on to other life tasks such as intimacy, generativity and productivity, and much more. For many Native people, this is an extremely complex process for so many reasons. So, we all look different. We're all Myaamia people, but we all look different. But a lot of times people place this idea of what phenotype we're supposed to have in order to be Native. In addition, it's complex because the government has decided for us what it means to be Indian many times. It's complex because we're also ingrained within American society, and the Americans' view of what it means to be Native doesn't fit with our own. It's complex because it's multidimensional, and I can't explain it in a half-hour presentation. So as I think about this, all of the things I've been taught in my psychology courses for, 7 years now, it doesn't fit with my understanding of Myaamia identity. Doesn't fit at all. Because for Myaamia people, this is a lifelong task. This doesn't begin in adolescence. It begins well before that and extends well past that for the rest of our lives. This is something that's dependent on one's family, on one's community, both proximal, so our community that's very close to us, and our broader community as a Myaamia people, and other social forces that act on that. When I think of our Myaamia people, this definition doesn't resonate with me. While we have a collective identity that does make us different from other people, that's not necessarily what's important to us. Part of our collective identity includes language, tribal games like lacrosse and the moccasin game, art forms like ribbon work, beading, wood burning, storytelling, food in terms of gathering, hunting, knowledge, preparation, ecology, and so much more. There are these pieces of ourselves that allow us to become a collective unit or individual strands of Asapa. A large part of the Myaamia identity is all about resilience and passing on of knowledge. Our ways of knowing and being as Myaamia people includes this responsibility to pass on our knowledge that we have with other people. In addition, in today's manifestation of what it means to be resilient, instead of examining how Myaamia is different from other groups, we must be able to acknowledge how all of those other groups we're a part of also help us to grow as a people, as Myaamia people. Recognize that we can both be similar and different at the same time. The knowledge that we gain through other experiences, like from college majors, from our jobs, our life experiences, extended families, these things still have a place within Myaamiaki, and they allow us to really create this flexible net, this flexible network. We all approach information differently as Myaamia people. However, this Myaamia community allows us to take in that information in a different way. It serves as a lens through which we see the world, and in turn, this helps us to incorporate into our sense of self. This information is then spread to the community. It adapts and gets reincorporated as part of the Myaamia identity. Truly, everything we do becomes Myaamia knowledge. In picking up our individual pieces of Asapa and continuing to strengthen our net, there are 3 aspects of identity that are important to recognize. First, there is belonging, connection, and support. These are very important for passing on this identity to the next generation. Within the construction of this net, we create a support network that catches and adapts and incorporates our youth into our community through these 3 aspects. So the first is this sense of belonging. This is both perceived belonging by an individual, so perceiving whether or not you belong to that group, and also community level belonging, the community making someone feel as though they belong. For example, for me, when I initially started going to A1 Zapata, I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged. This was something my grandma talked about, and it seemed like something that belonged to her, but wasn't quite mine yet. I had gone to powwows and a few annual meetings, but it was like something I did and not necessarily something I was a part of at that time. At that point, my identity was in the pre-encounter stage, so before I had really experienced that event that caused me to think about it harder. However, the community did tell me I belonged, and they were persistent, and eventually I felt more included and like I belonged within the Myaamia community. A1 Zapata gave me the experiences I needed to feel like I belonged. And it didn't take me long as an individual to make sense of this belonging and how I can fit it into my Myaamia identity. But I want to take the time now to emphasize how important this can be. I reflect back on my A1 Zapata experience, and I remember a lot of people that I never saw again. There's a lot of people I've come to know and love, but there's a lot of people I haven't seen since that time. And so I reflect on that, and I'm like, why would that be? Why would I be so excited in the same events and other people might not? You know, this could be that they never had that event that stimulated their racial identity formation. It could be that they didn't feel like they belonged. The message I'm trying to send is this is an important part of identity formation, and we have a responsibility as a community to make every person feel as though they belong. So, if we as a community are able to strengthen our bond, our affinity, our identity, we deepen this sense of belonging and add all of these outcomes that allow us to live properly as people. I did, and a few years ago, have the opportunity to observe some A1 Zapata youth, and I want to share some of those findings that I had from these focus groups that I created. So I conducted 2 focus groups, well, more like 6, but 3 groups. I did pre-group interviews, and 3 groups I did post-group interviews, or post-A1 Zapata interviews. And at this time, I wanted the youth to talk about their identity, what it means to be Myaamia, some of their favorite parts about why they went to A1 Zapata. And some of the findings I found was that the identity of the youth at the pre-assessment, so before A1 Zapata happened, were based on sports, music, art, 4-H, a few people mentioned family. However, there was only 1 youth out of 20-something that mentioned being Myaamia as part of their identity at the pre-assessment. I asked just in general what it means to be Myaamia. At this, students mainly talked about family history and land, and I assume that's because of the theme of the camp that year was on ancestry. However, they really liked being at Fox Island and Fort Wayne because they felt like they connected with the land more and like it belonged to them, and they really didn't like the chiming of the bells at IPFW. So when I asked about families, many of them indicated that they learned what it means to be Myaamia from the parent that's also identifies as Myaamia. So to me, I got really excited by this. That means parents are talking to their kids about being Myaamia, and that's crucial to feeling like you belong. I also want to emphasize and begin to integrate the spouses that don't identify as Myaamia to help to strengthen this identity formation process and to encourage students to also, and for these people to also encourage their children to explore their identity as well. So the youth indicated that they wanted to come to Myaamia because of their family members that they don't get to see very often, their family made them come, or they had a favorite part of camp like lacrosse or the language or art. And my last question asked specifically what it means to be Myaamia for those individuals. This question was both exciting and heartbreaking at the same time. Some kids said, and I quote, "It means we have songs and a tradition with dances and stuff." Others said things like, "I feel different from my friends and my friends don't believe me." So this really reminded me of myself and feeling like people have 2 lives sometimes and these aren't well integrated. One claimed they just liked to go barefoot and have an excuse. Overall, these students are fairly developmentally advanced based on my experiences with other youth in terms of racial identity formation. However, most of these kids weren't yet incorporating Myaamia, the Myaamia community, into their identity. I will note at this point, I should have said this at the beginning, these were children, I think like 8 to 16, 15 or 16. So then after camp, I also conducted the post-camp interviews and students reflected on their favorite parts, and of course they liked lacrosse, but they also liked to learn how to cook Myaamia food, taking guesses about what words mean, and they really liked the cordage. Something I found interesting was that they liked the things that they could do all the time and to occupy their time and to not get bored. And I thought this was quite mature for them, like something that I wouldn't have expected. And in particular, because of a piece of information I got as an A1 Zapata camper, that there is no word for bored in our language. So this is quite reflective upon our knowledge system, something that they've gained by going to A1 Zapata. However, the most interesting thing that they discussed were surrounding what they learned that are important parts of being Myaamia. They replied with things like the moccasin game, because it's a game that's really old and that people have played for a long time. Students were able to really transcend time and to realize that these are things that are connected with people who came before us. In addition, they really appreciated learning connections with other campers, like how they were related to them. And lastly, I was struck by a conversation that arose out of these focus groups. One student asked, just in general, how is it that Myaamia people have come to be who they are today? A very mature question, I thought. One of the other students immediately responded with, have you heard of the story where the Myaamia come out of the water? That's our creation story, or our coming out story. And I thought that was a time where, at the beginning of the week, students wouldn't have had the answer for that. These camps are powerful. They allow the students to engage in thinking about themselves, their community, and the intersectionality of the two. And I'm hoping that over time, that this Myaamia identity isn't separate from the rest of their life, and that it can become part of who they are as a person, and not two distinct parts. So another outcome that's important to note is that feeling of connection. There's this sense of wanting to give back to the community. So part of Myaamia ways of knowing and being involves giving back to your community. And the way I learned this was simply through observing people. I knew from my early days at A1 Zapata camps that people were just giving back. People were just doing what they knew how to do and sharing it with everyone. But I didn't know how to do that. I was like, how can I get to a place where I know what to tell people? But I really began to internalize that this act of giving back to the community is part of who we are. Without this giving back, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today, and my family and my future family would not be able to have the experiences that I've had. So in a way, this giving back allows me to transcend time as well and learn how people, my ancestors before me, gave back, how people today give back, and hopefully the next generation to come will give back. I can't help but think of how my grandmother has shared the story of the 3 women before her who have shaped our community to be where it is today. So what does it mean to give back? It means participating in community events, providing your specialties or goods or resources to the community. It means passing on knowledge. It means thinking about the Myaamia community on a daily basis. It means reaching out to every person to make them feel like they belong. And this will be observed through self-reflection and incorporation into identity, as well as community-level observation. This creates a cyclical pattern that connects every tribal member. And then there's support, the last piece of this. And this is an interesting piece of the puzzle. This simple act of splicing our asapa and creating an interconnected net means that we are creating a support network. However, this can include things like physical support, like money, resources, housing. It can also include emotional support. This journey of identity formation is not easy. It is something that people cry about all the time. And it requires people to be in tune with who they are and understand who they are. And it's an emotionally challenging process. And so we need to be able to support one another and to feel as though we are able to receive that support from other people. This is one of the less explicit parts of identity formation. This important aspect is something we do so naturally as a people. The tribe already works very hard to support others, in terms of education, providing monetary and physical support, help with elders, help with food, help with shelter, and so much more. In addition, the networks we're creating today and in every other tribal event we have creates a support network, a place where we can talk about our experiences. In addition, the networks that we create at our events allow us to reach out for that support, and there's always room for growth. But I feel like this is something that's part of Myaamia ways of knowing and being, something that we have readily available for anyone who needs it. So I've shared today much about what we're observing in the Myaamia community. and what I've experienced as a Myaamia youth. For my final reflection, I want to bring it back to this concept of picking up the thread and weaving the net with Asapa. As a nation, a strong tribal community of Myaamia, we're at the cusp of an amazing phase of our collective journey. As a community, we're splicing the Asapa as individuals, and individuals help us to splice our Asapa, as well as connecting the self with others, forming this net. Our renewal of who we are, our reclamation of who we are, and our determination to remain true to who we are has given me, and dare I say the next generation of Myaamia, an anchor that will strengthen our community for generations to come. I, for one, say Newe.